You don't want to be known as soft. You don't want to be known as small. You don't want to be known as easy to push around. You know, this is a tough game, and there's a lot of tough guys, and these guys are warriors out on the ice.
Welcome to Between the Hash Marks from the Business of Hockey and the Goal podcast with Richard York and Les Kowalski. Let's start this episode. Did you know from a Forbes 2019 report, the New York Rangers' current value was $1.65 billion. The Toronto Maple Leafs was at $1.5 billion. The Montreal Canadiens was at $1.34 billion. The Chicago Blackhawks was at $1.085 billion. The Boston Bruins were at $1 billion, and the Detroit Red Wings were at $800 million. Let me ask you a question. Why are the Rangers worth $1.6 billion as an original six team, and Detroit is only worth half of that?
Well, that's certainly a very interesting question and a long-winded answer, especially when you look at different levels of success in the original six franchise teams. Montreal has won 24 cups, and the Rangers have won 4. And I think they've won 1 cup in the last 70 years. So it's pretty hard to justify the level of success that way. And the big theory that I have for this is that when you look at any other New York franchise, any other team, varying levels of success, they always have support. They never struggle financially. None of them. You know, do you think the Yankees struggle? No. I think I said they were top 10 in the world of one of the richest franchises. The Knicks, do you think the Knicks struggle? Do you think the Giants struggle? The theory for this episode of Between the Hash Marks for the New York Rangers and their level of financial success is that it goes beyond hockey team to hockey team, that it actually translates into city versus city, that New York loves everything New York. Boston loves everything Boston. Philadelphia loves everything Philadelphia. That when you got so many of these big cities crammed together at the borders like that, you have to find ways to distinguish yourself from one city to the next. So all New Yorkers are going to support New York teams. You'd be hard-pressed to find many hockey fans of surrounding cities living in New York because it's a pride. It's a pride in the fan base. That is my theory, is that there is a lot of people in New York, and all the baseball fans support the hockey fans, and all the hockey fans support the basketball fans. And no matter what franchise it is, you support your city, not just your franchise. We talk about a competitive battlefield in business and competitive battlefield in hockey. When you're looking at that side of the continent, there's certainly a lot of evidence that it's city versus city more than it is hockey team versus hockey team. They obviously, being an original six franchise, means they have a whole lot of history. All of them do. The history certainly goes way back from when the NHL first established itself. Well, why don't you kick it off with the report that you have about how the Rangers fans feel about their Ranger history?
There was a survey that was done by The Athletic, and it was published on May the 8th, 2020. In this survey, it asked questions. When did you become a Rangers fan? 25.9% said between the Messier years. 17.5% was in the Patrick Esposito years. 19% was in the 1970s. 16.4%, they call it the Dark Ages. That was the late 90s and early 2000s. How many games do you attend a year? 65.5% say 1 to 10 games. 22.2% said 0 games. How many games do you watch on TV? 58% said 61 to 82 games. 21.
Whoa. 58% of the fan base said that they watch 61 to 82 games.
61 to 82 games.
You New Yorkers have a lot of time on your hands. I don't know if I could do that for any franchise. I don't know if I could watch 61 games of hockey in a year, let alone of one franchise.
21.2% watch 41 to 60 games on TV. 12.9% watch 21 to 40 games on TV.
Wow. Devoted fan base.
Very devoted. What's your view of the rebuilding process? 50.8% said it's going really well. 35.4% say that it's way ahead of schedule. 7.6% said it's almost finished. and 6% say it's going okay.
Well, and we're certainly going to dissect that a little bit in our conversation here. And we're going to talk about how that rebuild is going and why they need to rebuild it. The description of the dark ages that you talked about for the franchise. Every franchise has dark ages. 10 years from now, Detroit Red Wing fans are going to be talking about this age being their dark ages for their franchise. So it's nothing new, Rangers fans. You guys are coming out of it like champs.
In this same Athletic article, they're talking about on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being your worst, 10 being your best. How's your faith in John Davidson and Jeff Gorton at this point? At the level 10, 21.1% said 10. At 9, it's 38.5%. At 8, it's 30%. At 7 is at 8.4%. 6 is 1.2%. And then everything else is basically negligible at 0.
Basically 7 plus.
7 plus. So basically everybody likes what they're seeing with what's happening with the Rangers right now.
That's good, especially if you're a Rangers fan. Why don't we look back a little farther though, and we can start talking about the history that the Rangers have had to let, like they're not just going to be worth 1.6 billion overnight or over one season just because they're experiencing a bit of success in their rebuild, right? 5 years ago, they were still worth number 1 on the NHL charts. So there has to be a foundation there somewhere in the history, and we're going to start dissecting that as we talk. Just to give you some interesting facts about the Rangers' history that maybe even you fans don't know about, is back in 1928, New York Rangers were the first NHL franchise American located team to win a Stanley Cup. It was their 3rd year in the league. They came in at 26. They were the first American team to win that Stanley Cup. That'll go down in their history books forever. Finally broke a curse. Most Rangers fans are going to talk about the curse. This is what got a lot of them on the current bandwagon, was in 93, 94, before the dark ages that you spoke of, where they broke the curse to 54 years and they finally won their Stanley Cup with Mark Messier as their captain. Mark Messier was the first 2-team winning captain in NHL history. Brian Leetch won the Conn Smythe that year, and he was the first American-born player to win a Conn Smythe. So you look back, and there's lots of firsts for the Rangers, especially from an American point of view, that there are American firsts in a lot of things. Montreal certainly owns a lot of firsts in Canadian history, but when you're dealing with a huge market like New York, it pays to have that kind of rich history.
There's another article that I actually came across at The Athletic. It was dated from May 13th, 2020, and it talks about their running out of space to put up banners in the rafters because of how many rock star hockey players they've actually had come through.
And it's true. They've been around for a long time, and you're right. They got a lot of rock stars.
So one of the things that they've been talking about is actually creating a Hall of Fame, either something that's actually in the concourse of the arena or potentially even something that is independent of the arena, that fans have somewhere to go and bring in a larger fan base into the club.
That seems beneficial, that you'd have your own little Hall of Fame section. I know in Toronto they have a Hockey Hall of Fame section, which houses all the trophies and the hardware, like the Rangers talking about their own designated Hall of Fame. That's certainly a good business strategy, is that you could make money off of that if you wanted people to come in and they just wanted to see the history of a single franchise.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense to do it that way, right? It's a new revenue stream that could be actually developed out. One of the other things that they're talking about here is that they don't want to be taking numbers out of circulation or have too many formal ceremonies. They would rather just have an inductee with a plaque, but still potentially have that number still within circulation.
I suppose you would eventually run out of numbers, right? There's only 99 that you can use, and certainly you can't use number 99, right? Or number 66. And there's certainly varying degrees. So it makes sense that you would be able to recycle, especially long term, that you keep using these numbers and you remember the name and not necessarily the number on the jersey.
Now, one of the things that they're actually talking about also in this article, they've had a lot of players who have been honored, but there's players who haven't been honored despite being worthy of being honored. So having a Hall of Fame to be able to honor them from their perspective makes a lot of sense, because then they can actually draw and pull in the entire history of the Rangers.
I guess so. That would be more recognized by Ranger fans than it would hockey fans, right? From especially the other side of the continent. You know, nobody cares about necessarily the entire history of the Rangers except for Rangers fans. And if there's enough of a, interest in revenue stream to do it, why not, right? And, you know, the Rangers aren't going anywhere. There's going to be more history that this is probably a move to prep them for the future as well, long-term success.
Well, there's a lot of rock star hockey players that are on the Rangers, aren't there? Like, I mean, talk a little bit about that.
Well, when you talk about rock stars, you have to go into the dark ages. So I'm going to dip into the dark ages. So bear with me, Rangers fans. We'll get through this together. You start talking about the rock stars that they started bringing in, that they were signing players more for their pedigree than they were their performance. And that was to draw fans into the stands as basically rock stars, as we keep talking about. So when you look back at the 2000 to 2002 era, here's some of the names that were on the Rangers bench. Mark Messier, Theo Fleury, Pavel Bure, Jaromir Jagr, Alex Kovalev, Eric Lindros, Brian Leach. A year or two before that was Gretzky. You had Paul Coffey. You have all of these rock stars that established themselves in different parts of the world, except for Brian Leach. He's homegrown. He's a Rangers to the end. Like, can you imagine that roster with all of those players? Like, that is ridiculous. And you have no idea if they're going to get along. You have too many people trying to lead that team. It was a big mess. That they were more focused and more worried about creating a rock star team of all the superstars in the league, basically making an all-star team. This is before the cap era, as we're speaking in the dark ages. So all they did was open their checkbooks and sign, throw money out the window. And that was, unfortunately, Glen Sather's the first half. Well, more than his first half. That was a good portion of his career as general manager. Thankfully, you have some silver linings that got you out of the dark ages, and it started with the King. Rangers fans know who I'm talking about when I say the King, and I'm referring to Henrik Lundqvist, who has become a fan favorite and a staple in the Rangers franchise on and off the ice, is that he holds himself in really high regard. He's a good guy. He loves his fans. He loves New York, and that's exactly who they want and what they want. And his era in New York started in 2005, 2006. And he was there for a long time. He's 38 years old now. He's at the tail end of his career, and that's why there's a lot of talk about what to do with him and where to hang his number, because he is going down as a Ranger fan favorite. So when we talk about Glen Sather and his history with the New York Rangers, it unfortunately involves a open checkbook and rockstar signing. Is that he kept trying to put together all-star teams in hope that they would mesh instead of finding structured players that could play together. He kept trying to duplicate previous dynasties in the league. Everybody tried to replicate the Oilers. Everybody tried to replicate the Oilers' success. That's why he brought Mark Messier in. That's why he brought Gretzky in, Paul Coffey, all of these guys that won their cups with Edmonton. He was the coach of that team, by the way. You know, you look at the history, he knows all those guys and he knows they can perform, and he did it as their coach. So Glen Sather was the coach of the Oilers during their dynasty years. So as a general manager, he tried to put the band back together and create that Edmonton All-Star team again. And he tried to do it for the New York Rangers. So you can say what you want about Glen Sather. He was an excellent coach. He won many cups. He's down in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And he, as a general manager, helped make the Rangers into the most successful financial NHL franchise. However, I wouldn't say his history is clean slate. Certainly when the cap came in, he had to get a lot more creative. I still don't think it went all that well. There was a lot of contracts they had to buy out. There's lots of money that he kept throwing away. He kept throwing term money, and then he hit the cap and then go, oh shit. I would say that it was a good move by the ownership group to move on from Glen Sather. He stepped down. You know, he deserves to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and he's done wondrous works there. He just wasn't the general manager for the future, and I think you got a lot of New York Ranger fans that would agree with that. It was time to move on. The mediocre success wasn't cutting it anymore. You have a very loyal fan base, and there's only so much any fan base can take. But when we get into his successor is Jeff Gorton, I want to read Jeff Gorton's Wikipedia page because it shows his history leading up to it, up to being the general manager of the Rangers. And I think his history is incredibly important for his future endeavors. And for any of the Rangers fans that don't know this, he started off with the Boston Bruins, and he was there for a while. So don't hate him. He did great things there. But this is what Wikipedia says. Gorton began working for the Bruins in 1992. He worked in Boston as an assistant general manager for 7 seasons and served as the team's intern general manager from March 2006 until July 2006. So he was only a general manager for 4 or 5 months, with Boston, but look what he did. In his time as interim general manager for the Bruins, Gorton most notably ran the 2006 NHL entry draft, which he produced for the Bruins, Phil Kessel, Milan Lucic, Brad Marchand. And at the same draft, Gorton traded goaltender Andrew Raycroft to the Toronto Maple Leafs for goalie prospect Tuukka Rask. Raycroft was coming off a sub-par season, and a 2-year stint in Toronto would prove disastrous, with the Leafs buying him out in the final year of his contract. Rask, meanwhile, had been selected in the first round of the 2005 NHL entry draft by Toronto and went on to win the Vezina Trophy as the league's best goaltender in 2013-14. He also won a Stanley Cup for him. He was the winning goaltender. He was the backup goaltender. The winning goaltender was Tim Thomas. On July 1st, Gorton signed Zdeno Chara and Mark Savard as free agents. Do hockey fans know who those two people are? I think you do. Chara would obviously go on to win the Norris Trophy and be a staple on the defensive line of the Bruins for a long time. That was a contract that Gorton signed. He reassumed his assistant general manager duties when our best friend Peter Chiarelli was hired as permanent general manager. He was dismissed along with the respected scout, and Gorton was immediately picked up as a pro scout by the Rangers. He did a year as a pro scout, and then he did a couple years as president of player personnel, and then he was assistant general manager for 4 or 5 years, and then eventually the general manager of the New York Rangers. So this guy's got a hell of a history.
So you're saying that Gorton was actually fired by Chiarelli?
Yes, our best friend Peter Chiarelli.
You know what? Peter Chiarelli is just a walking disaster. He's like a human wrecking ball wherever he goes. Like, what is wrong with this guy? Like, I don't get it. I really don't get it.
Well, certainly in that little 4 or 5 month stretch that he did with the Bruins, you can see the level of success the Bruins. He built them in 5 months. He built the Bruins into a cup team.
This has been part 1 of Between the Hash Marks. Next week, we'll be posting part 2 of this 1-hour episode. Thanks for listening to Between the Hash Marks on the Business of Hockey and the Goal. Till next week. Thanks for listening to Between the Hash Marks from the Business of Hockey and the Goal, produced by the Power Roadmap Podcast. Until next time.